to Freshly Forever, a podcast that gives you fascinating insights week after week. Here's your host, Vi Kumar.
Folks, today on podcast Freshly Forever, we have here with us Paige Roberts. She is a sports and fitness enthusiast who uses a process called Performance Neuro training, which is a combination of sports psychology, brain spotting, and hot and cold biomodulation laser light therapy. Through this process, she provides sports injury intensive recovery sessions and sports and life performance coaching. It's just such a joy for me to welcome Paige on the podcast. Welcome, Paige, to Podcast Freshly Forever.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
What got you drawn to sports psychology and neuroscience? You are now an expert in that, and you were an NCAA athlete before, playing for Colorado Mesa University, or rather running cross country for them, correct?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your journey, Paige?
Well, I've always really been interested in exercise science and health and wellness. Ever since I was a small child, I refused to eat meat and started only wanting vegetables and fruits. And so it was kind of funny that I didn't even realize that was kind of like being a health enthusiast at the time. I just knew what I liked. And so from there, I started taking college classes when I was still in high school, and I got really interested in nutrition and the exercise science, and basically the benefits for the body and pushing back aging. And my dad had cancer the first time in my late teens. And so I got really obsessed with really trying to understand what prevents cancer, what keeps us healthy. So went on to Colorado Mesa and ran cross country there and finished my degree in exercise science. And then I was pursuing a graduate degree in exercise science and started to realize that so much was mental. Working in the hospital, seeing individuals coming in the ER, they were just in a lot of distress, but then they would do all these tests and the people were fine, right? But they weren't fine. It was more the psychological piece. And then I started to seek out healing for myself from my past injuries and sports concussions. And I found this type of therapeutic modality called brain spotting. So this was 15 years ago, and it really shifted me instantly. And I had started to realize then at that point that I'd had all this sports trauma and, of course, adverse childhood experiences. And very particularly, I had a friend complete suicide when he was a college football player. He was a quarterback.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so I was like kind of curious within and around all of that as to why he completed suicide. And then that's right when, I was still really struggling with concussions I'd had from sports concussions. And then my high school swim team school bus crashed on our way to our first meet. And so I got a pretty bad concussion at that point and tore a lot of muscles in my shoulder. And so I didn't even realize all of those things were the things that were causing me a lack of pure enjoyment in my life, as well as I had a lot of physiological reactions, like because the school bus, we were headed one way and we did a 360 on the ice. It was so slick and went off the embankment and rolled. And so every time I'd ride in a car, if I thought the road was wet or even icy, I was worried, right? My body would start tensing up. And
you would be reminded of that.
Yeah, well, and it was the unconscious muscle guarding because my body had experienced, being not in control before. So I kept unconsciously thinking that the car was out of control. And so I would brace and tense up. And so I found this type of therapeutic modality called brain spotting. It was a social worker in sport out of Steamboat Springs. And I went in for a session to really work on being afraid of riding in the car. And then all the other content came out. So I started to realize like my stress fractures from when I was younger, because I would run too much. I had a really terrible coach who was always telling us we were fat and that we needed to run more. And he was really overtraining us, completely not qualified during my high school years. And just some of the things that he had said were very implanted in my brain, which they were actually very maladaptive, unhealthy things, especially for a young woman. So all that stuff started to come up because in this trauma reprocessing mind-body based somatic modality, we really have no idea what's going to come up when we first start addressing the target trauma, as we call it. So I came in for the to ease my mind around the ice on the road or being worried, because being in Colorado, there's always ice on the road. So I was always extremely physiological, hyperly vigilant. And so it started there. And then all these other things came up, as in things that had dysregulated my nervous system. So after I had that experience with that modality, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. And I want to work with athletes, because I realized at that point how all of those negative sport experiences and life experiences had impacted my performance ability, and also just not wanting other young athletes to go through those things. Right. So I switched my major to Master's of Social Work, but I had to get the background credits and the experience and all those good things before I could start. So it was a couple years before I could make that pivot into clinical social work. And so now it's been about 10 years that I've been had the privilege to utilize this modality with other athletes and watching them heal, and really finding all this unconscious content that could be causing them the distress that they're feeling in the current moment.
Okay. So from an athlete to a trainer to a coach to social worker, you have just kind of taken us through a 360 of your entire journey. And first of all, sorry about your father having cancer when you were very young. It's never fun, I know, to go through or see a parent suffer. And sorry about that friend that committed suicide, an athlete friend. And sorry about your own experience with the school bus incident. So I think, you've gone through a lot, and no wonder you tried to turn all these traumatic moments into something positive so you can really help other people. And that's just phenomenal, Paige. And first of all, thank you for being on this journey and helping other people. Yeah. I think, that's just tremendous that you're doing that.
Well, yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's what I enjoy. I think the thing that I enjoy the most is seeing a person when they first come in, very dysregulated nervous system, and knowing in a few weeks that they're going to feel amazing. So that's probably the coolest part about getting to utilize this therapeutic modality and just being in the field that I'm in. So it's great.
Okay. So based on what you just told us, I think I have a couple of questions there. One, how do you know, or how are you able to identify that someone has a dysregulated nervous system? And first off, the injuries in athletes, why do they tend to manifest more and more? What do you think are the causes? And does that result in a dysregulated nervous system as well?
It does. So any trauma on our nervous system, whether it be emotional or physical, pushes us up to a sympathetic nervous system state. So there's two ends of our nervous system. They call it the polyvagal theory. It's Dr. Stephen Porges' hypothesis, and really proves to be true. But our sympathetic is really where we're in that fight, flight, freeze, right? So that's our on guard, reactive, hypervigilant. And then we go down to the parasympathetic, and that's our rest and recovery and relax. So there's quite a bit of room in between those two. But what we start to see with trauma, as Dr. Robert Scar, he was an MD neurologist, found that we really can't discern between the two, emotional or physical trauma. We react the same way. And so every time that a traumatic experience happens, physical or emotional, it's pushing us more into that sympathetic nervous system. And of course, in the moment, we all go there. So that's the shock, that shocky feeling, that shaky feeling, the cold feeling, sometimes shivering, obviously crying, having a rapid heart rate. All of those things are that sympathetic nervous system. But what happens over time is the more and more and more traumas that we've experienced. That's why the ACEs test, when the Adverse Childhood Experiences test, when they talk about if you have a 10 on there, your nervous system's pretty hot. It's pretty activated. So when we talk about that, we call it a trauma memory network. So all of those memories begin to link up, and every single time something even slightly, after we've got a whole bunch of trauma memories in our reservoir, any even little slight thing like someone cutting you off in traffic, it'll send a person with a lot of trauma in their reservoir up to the sympathetic. And sometimes you start to live there. So that's when you see an athlete, when they come in, they're not sleeping well. They're having a hard time falling asleep. They're experiencing anxiety symptoms. They're experiencing depression symptoms, because with Dr. Daniel Amen's work, he's a MD psychiatrist. He talks about how 70% of anxiety has that depression component. And a lot of times people don't even realize that they're experiencing depression, because the anxiety symptoms, the sympathetic nervous system, they're so profound that when they're really hypervigilant, that's so uncomfortable, and they're having panic attacks. People call them, it's funny to me when someone comes out, I'm having panic attacks. It's like, yeah, you're staying in the sympathetic and you can't come down. No matter how much you think about it, no matter the deep belly breathing, no matter what you're doing, you're not able to come out of that sympathetic nervous system. You're stuck. So when they're not uncomfortable like that, they don't even realize that when they're in this kind of like lull, not very happy, just kind of flat effect, not enjoying things, that's actually a level of depression for them. So it's really these the nervous system and the mental illness symptoms. So when an athlete comes in and they're having insomnia, the panic attacks, anxiety, depression, potentially not being able to focus, not being able to hear their coach when they're out on the field. That's an interesting one to me too, because they'll be like, my coach keeps telling me to do this, or they're yelling at me in the moment, and I'm just freezing. I'm not hearing a thing. It feels like I'm outside of my body. It feels like things are muffled. It's like, ooh, you're like living in the sympathetic when the pressure's on to compete. And that's the other thing. If you've got a trauma memory network that's full, well, automatically competing, racing, whatever that looks like, playing in a game, it's pushing on your adrenals to have some cortisol and to have some of that endorphin, adrenaline kind of kick. Well, that can activate this trauma memory network. So what you'll see a lot of times too is that an athlete will do great in practice, and then they get out there to compete and they're like, I don't know what's going on. It's like my memory networks, my sports memory networks are all on point. I've been doing this over and over and over. I've been putting in the repetition. But when the competition comes, they're slowing down. They're not able to control their body. They're not as precise in their movements. And it's super confusing. They're throwing wild, or they can't catch something, or they're shaky, or they're getting blocks and yips. That's kind of the, just slang around this, that the nervous system shutting down and can't perform optimally because you're up in the sympathetic and you don't have full control. So that's what
Let me ask you there then, does it have to be a trauma that can cause the sympathetic to be full, or could it just be nerves?
And so when we talk about nerves and stress, that's going to be the same thing. We have a lot of really fancy, a whole dictionary of languaging around emotions and feelings, but really anything that is increasing your heart rate and stressing your nervous system is going to push someone in the sympathetic nervous system state. So I don't give that languaging a lot of weight or
credence. Okay.
Yeah, because it's just stress. And so that's what you see with these high performing kids. So I work in the Seattle, Washington, Bellevue area. So we have exceptionally brilliant, smart, successful individuals in this area. We just really do. It's attracted here with all these huge tech companies. And so, of course, their children are really smart, right? So these kids have a lot of pressure on themselves, right? They're applying to 30 colleges. They're playing every sport, doing every club, doing everything they possibly can to want to be the best version of themselves. And so that level of stress and, those expectations on them is automatically pushing these kids in the sympathetic nervous system. It's not that the other end of the spectrum would be individual children living in situations where they don't have their Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, right? They don't have housing or food. So it's polarity, which you see that both in these instances, you're going to see activated sympathetic nervous systems. So that's what I see with the kids where I'm at. So absolutely, the nerves, the stress, the pressure. Oftentimes you can sit here and talk to a kid and be like, well, does it stress you out? This is this? No. And you're like, well, what about the pressure? They're like, oh, I have a lot of pressure. I want to get into these schools. I want to play well. I want to not let myself down. All of that's that same thing. And really in our society, there's so much inundation of seeing, oh my gosh, this kid succeeding, this person doing this.
Oh, yes. The achievement culture.
Yeah. So that's stressing their nervous system, getting them up in the sympathetic.
Okay. Yeah, we are so immersed in it. And I think you rightly pointed that out. And what about the injuries? Why do they tend to manifest more and more? Is it a matter of not doing the recovery right? And is it not just the athlete themselves? Okay, for a junior athlete, there's not just too much at their disposal when they are, say, in middle school or high school, correct? In terms of the infrastructure. As long as the parent is able to provide for and kind of, help guide that process, maybe that can happen. But when it comes to the collegiate athletes, what happens there? Or even in the juniors, what happens? And why do injuries manifest more and more?
But this is what I see in one of my missions at this point, and one of my biggest frustrations, I guess, is that we have now integrated in sports psychs when it comes to the national level athletes, right? So we've got them in the Olympic sector and, those types of U.S. ski team, those types of athletes, they have access. We've got the NFL, we've got all those national teams, they have access. And of course, these are adults, they're very responsible for their own lives. So, they can hire a sports psych. We're all over the place. We're on Psychology Today. You Google it, you can find it in your area. But then we have our collegiate athletes. And so they'll have about one sports psych for every single athlete within the university, which I can tell you right now is really impossible to see an athlete consistently that way. There's just too many. And then also, understanding if you need a sports psych too, because those are still kind of like the children in our, they're still young. And so they're not necessarily going to identify some of those symptoms, right? The symptomology of what they need. But the biggest issue is that we need this resource within schools, particularly all the way down to middle school when we start introducing athletics, even sooner in some of these big sports clubs. Okay, so you have a 5-year-old playing soccer. The second that pressure's there, the second that they have their own expectations, then that's when we need this intervention to start. And so that's giving, positive coping skills, of course, the clinical work, talking about the perfectionism issues. Perfectionism is a huge piece in sports psychology that we identify within one of our theories and understanding that high performers are perfectionists. So it's kind of the all or nothing thinking. So really addressing all that stuff at a low level and setting up the nervous system so that we are in training this nervous system to not stay in the sympathetic, but instead just the normal arcs and valleys of how our nervous system should function. And that's completely possible. But you see that we don't even have enough school psychs, like school counselors to handle the school body within our public schools. And then there's a lot of private schools who don't even have a school counselor. So there's a lot there. It's like, and to me, it's always trying to tell the parents, like, well, you shouldn't pay these clubs all this money if they don't have all the resources for your child, particularly with concussions. So when I see an athlete and they're on their 4th concussion, they're now having to pull out of soccer, females in soccer. We know that females, it takes longer for their recovery process from a concussion, but they're on about their 4th concussion, right? The first one happened when they were 10, then they had another one when they're about 12, then like 14, and then now here they are at 17 and they're done because they have these persistent post-concussion syndrome symptoms. And so when you're asking the parents, like, well, shouldn't they have a sports psych like myself that you had to dig around and go to Children's Hospital and get referred to after months, and the 4th concussion 6 years later after the first one? Shouldn't that club that you're paying a lot of money, should they have had someone there to immediately address and attack these symptoms and take care of this athlete? As well as, when it comes to physical therapy and some of those pieces too, because they work in conjunction with the brain. Our brain, the neuroocular aspect and the vestibular aspect with the cognitive and anxiety and the physical arousal, we're working with the same thing. So concurrently, when you're treating an individual with concussion, they need both at the same time because the symptoms will get imbalanced and one will be more take over if the other one's not being addressed. And so we know that. So this is Dr. Mickey Collins with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, who works with the Penguins and the Steelers. He has a whole model that we should be following. And it's not like this stuff is a secret. It's out there. It's in all these conferences, all these pieces that we are getting our continuing ed in, and we know these things. So why are we not requiring these youth serving clubs to add in these resources? I don't know.
Okay. So are you trying to say that the psychological aspect is even contributing to injuries in the first place? Or
Yes.
what treatment methods need to be adopted for athletes to feel their best? And what do you think is ignored right now?
It is absolutely the mental piece, right? So we've got in the school districts now, we have an athletic trainer, right? So that was years ago, they didn't even have athletic trainers in any of these lower levels of sport. So that's huge. That's amazing. So they're able to, in the moment, address it, make sure they're not getting sent back in, so they're getting hurt even more, give a little bit of, PT kind of recommendation and say, hey, you need this referral, you got to go here. But the mental piece is just absolutely not getting addressed. If you address the mental piece the first time with any injury, and it's Dr. Jeffrey Kuchar with it, he has the whole sports concussion wing of the American Academy of Neurology, and he did a whole study, and this was years ago, gosh, it was about 8 years ago now, that we know that the athlete gets into this kind of neurodepression the same with an injury as a concussion, right? But if we address it right away, we pull them out of that. We get them back into a positive nervous system state. And when we talk about that nervous system depression, it's really similar to being in the sympathetic nervous system, of having these symptoms, these negative symptoms. It's the freeze kind of state. So we know, again, if we address injuries and treat them appropriately the first time, psychologically and physiologically, that the athlete will be less susceptible to another injury. And so with the mental illness kinds of stuff, it's the third leading cause of death in college athletes is suicide, right? We know that it's the number one cause of death in these young boys, suicide right now. This is before college. This is scary. So why are we not addressing this mental piece when there's the first injury, first level of stress, when the child is falling apart because they thought, well, I lost, I didn't get the ball when I needed to. Well, we need intervention right then. We address it right then, we can get the nervous system back in regulation, and we do not create this pattern that continues over and over and over again. And I say it's pretty textbook when I see an athlete that I had a U.S. ski teamer a while back that she'd crashed on a course, a Northern American competition course in Aspen on a corner, and she got a concussion. So the next year she came back, she crashed in the same spot and tore her ACL. You can't tell me that the body didn't remember that corner and started freaking out and she lost control. So it's that kind of stuff. Had we addressed her concussion, and she didn't get any intervention for the concussion, and she didn't do any trauma reprocessing to get the body to let go of that negative experience unconsciously. So through our five senses. So, it's really, we need this resource of the mental conditioning coaches, sports psychs, whatever, at a very low level, young age, because it will address all these other problems that we're looking at further on. And so, if your nervous system's hypervigilant, you're losing your capacity to have more flexibility. You're losing your full motor control. So yes. So if we've had these injuries, we've set up the nervous system to be in a really dysregulated state. And so of course you're more susceptible to injury. And I just find it fascinating again that, you'll have this athlete that went all the way to 17, never had an injury, got one, and then, another one and another one and another one. You're like, wow. Okay. So this needed to be addressed. And perhaps some of the psychological senses of failure or too much pressure needed to be addressed as well. And it wouldn't have gotten them into the state. And then of course, you said with recovery, sympathetic nervous system, they're not sleeping. They know now that overtraining syndrome is really just a lack of a lot of sleep and recovery.
It's good that you brought up sleep in aiding recovery. I think collegiate athletes, by the time, they finish with their training, by the time they finish with the academic side of it, it's not any surprise that they probably don't get enough sleep, or it's not 100% achievable. What about the physical versus the mental side of the training aspect? And are we focusing more on quantity over quality? And is that contributing to all of this? And when I say physical over mental, then do we need to introduce mindfulness? Do we need to introduce meditation and as part of the training itself? And say, instead of say someone, say in your case, cross country, or any track athlete or a swimmer, or say a tennis player, instead of them spending 3 hours of physical training every single day, 5 times 5 times in a week, should 3 days be focused on one and couple of days be focused on the mental side, say like mindfulness, meditation? Because I don't want to really sound super alarming out here to athletes that, hey, if an injury comes, it's going to occur again, right? So we really want to give them the tools to be able to face it and be able to deal with it, right, Paige?
Yeah. And so that whole thought process within and around more is better, with that training piece. I don't really know where that completely came from, aside from just not qualified coaches and trainers. Because when I went from high school, where they were overtraining us, again, they were having us run like 10 miles a day, which is not even what you need for a 5K race, right? Maybe a couple days a week. And I didn't know that. You don't know as a kid. You have no idea. And so when I went to college, the exercise physiologist at my college was our cross-country coach. So we used science. So we started using heart rate monitors so that he knew when we were recovered to send us on our intervals. And our mileage cut down by about half compared to what I was running in high school. And his whole thing was like, no, you need as much recovery as you need training. And again, this is, one gym in the whole, of a coach here, because not all of them have a PhD in physiology, right? So that's another issue that we're kind of looking at with coaches when you talk about this, a large amount of training. Is this really physiologically consistent with science? I don't know, and so that's another thing with coaches that gets me. And you'll even see at the highest level, gosh, the US ski team, most of their coaches have zero education. Oh, well, they were good skiers. I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't mean they should be training someone. There are PhDs in coaching. There are PhDs in physiology. So it's about wanting more, and us as consumers and the athletes, it's like, hey, that's us. We get to decide who is training us, and particularly the parents paying the college, all of these things. And so it's kind of trying to shine light on that stuff as opposed to just going along with the program. And again, this is more social work advocacy kind of stuff that I talk about, because in a perfect world, all of our coaches would have understood and are following that physical developmental process in their training programs. But you're still seeing some of these coaches like running an 8-year-old until they're vomiting. You're like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, no. Because again, trauma, you're pushing someone to vomit. That's a whole nother level of trauma in our nervous system, and vagal nerve, the 12th cranial nerve activation. That's not okay. And not going to be beneficial for training and recovery. But nonetheless, yes. So there is that piece alone that we need to look at and be sure that we are absolutely not tearing down our athletes and they are still building up. And then the other thing with the mental piece, yes. And that's the whole point of having that resource within the programs, right? Meditation and mindfulness, those are mental, because I call them mental conditioning, right? And deconditioning is going to be when you're sitting with the therapist clinically and you're working on releasing the traumas and healing that piece. But when we talk about mental conditioning, it is super easy to be able to integrate those things in. But again, you get these coaches, it's like sometimes a parent will find like, can you please talk to their coach? They blah, blah, blah. And so you talk to these coaches sometimes and they're just like, oh, I don't know. I do the mental stuff. My kids are fine. All that stuff's woo, woo, blah, blah. And you're like, whoa, okay. So there is this level of resistance always. And I think it's a kind of a power and control ego thing when it comes to it. But it's like, wow. So a lot of mental conditioning, sports psychs like myself will offer time to come and work with the team and teach them some skills. We're out there. It's like, yeah, ask us. Why not? We enjoy that. Right. And it's nice to get out of the clinical box sometimes, but even if you offer some of these clubs like, oh no, well, maybe next season, I don't know. And you're just like, wow, this is so bizarre. Because yes, teaching these mental conditioning skills, there's other ones too, like visualizing and having the kids just this normal psychological interventions of things that they could do daily. They can keep a journal of all the things that went bad and like writing them out. We know journaling is really effective in helping an individual get over distress and things that are upsetting them. Just little things. And it's like, there just seems to be such a resistance still in sports culture of this whole like, oh, we just need to push them really hard and grit and hustle and making them tougher. It's like, it's not making them tougher. It's stressing their nervous system. And so it's just so frustrating. And then also when words matter, right? We know in energy psychology that they talk about doing that test where you take rice and you cook rice and you put in one and you put all these negative things on the outside of the rice container and then you put all these positive words on the outside of the rice container. This one will stay white. This one turns black. I mean, it molds. It's so fascinating. And they do this a lot in little kids' classes. In elementary school to show them how powerful words are and that they shouldn't be saying mean things to each other. But sometimes I sit here and I'm like, I have to remind coaches, 40-year-old men that like, hey, words matter, what you're saying. I know to you, you think that if you're only giving criticism, you're making them better, but you're absolutely not. You're actually deterring them and hurting them. So some of that positive reinforcement and even sandwiching it when we talk about like two positives and then a critique, right? But some coaches are resistant to that. Well, this is the way I've always done it. I'm like, okay, but how do you know? And they'll be like, well, I've had successful athletes. I've had ones make it to the Olympics. I'm like, great, that one. But what if more could make it to the Olympics if we shifted and changed things with what we understand, So it's just stuff like that. Yeah.
And you talked about that power aspect, Paige, and it's interesting you brought that up. Do you think that's also contributing to probably athletes not being able to express themselves even when they are in distress? And is that contributing to more of the physical side of the injuries? And again, we talked about this mindfulness, meditation, visualization, all these tools, correct? Can these tools in the box help alleviate these physical injuries before they transition even to a bigger realm on the mental side?
Absolutely.
And are these coaches, let's try to think from their standpoint for a minute, are these coaches struggling to be fair and be their real self themselves when it comes to, say, being fair about the quality over quantity piece? Because after all, they are under pressure to perform. And is this whole system somewhere contributing to all of this?
Well, so that's culture. So now we're talking about culture, which is different. Yeah. So the culture of the overarching, because we know some systems are super healthy, right? We know some coaches are amazing. They've got a sports psych working with them. Everything's going great, perfect. Communicate with the parents, positive, amazing. But the culture overall is still this disempower them, push them down so they come back harder. Okay, so we know that was sports, right? And then it's that whole, this is the way that my coach did it for me. I succeeded. Therefore, I'm going to do the same thing. And if I did something different and they failed, then, oh my gosh, I would have failed and I would have known differently. Why did I do something different? So there's a lot of fear there, right? So there's fear of changing up things and doing something a different way. And that's what's going on with culture. And then it's also, well, over the years, I've had control of my team. We've done well. But if I bring in someone else and I give away some of that control, what if they don't listen to me anymore? What if I don't have that control? So there is this, and every time I'm trying to work with a coach, I'm sitting there going, the stuff I do helps. The athletes can listen to you. They can hear you. They can, it's like what I'm doing is helping. I am not telling them something different than what you're telling them. Because they say, well, they need to listen to me. Like, what are you going to tell them? I need to know what you're going to tell. And you're like, whoa. I'm not telling them not to listen to you and to run the different way and to not train. So it's this whole thing of just that fear of, I want to allow for my team to be successful, right? Because in the end, the coaches, yes, they want success. They want the kids to prosper. They want the kids to get that college contract. They want those things. There's no doubt in my mind that they're not just out there like, oh yeah, I'm pushing them down and this is my world. No, they want what's best for the kids. But just doing things differently is scary. And it's outside of that comfort zone, and it's outside of the traditional culture of sport. And so it's scary. And culture only changes incrementally over time. So it is just like I said, in the last 9 years, we have sports psychs in national sports where we never did. We have every college has a sports psych. They never did. I mean, things are changing, absolutely. But I'm advocating for the last little pieces here. We want sports psychs in every level, and then this ensures that we have a great foundation for these kids to go up and be able to reach higher levels in sports. Because like you said, after they get hurt, I've seen so many decline when they're finally seeing me and they're a junior and senior in high school and they've had all of these things. They're in chronic pain and you're like, oh my gosh, this is fairly irreversible at this point for them to get a college scholarship at this point. Had they came after that first injury in freshman year in high school, maybe. But then it's working on this, like having to decision to retire, the grief, and working on that piece. So yeah.
Okay. But let's just back up a little. I'm just trying to also understand how important is it for a coach to not think of this as like a real power struggle, or I guess I'm using this term in a very loose sense, but say for them to not feel, okay, this psychologist is coming in. Is he or she going to make my team not listen to me? Whatever, that struggle, right? How important is it for coaches themselves to embrace this philosophy of listening or taking advantage of the sports psychologist themselves? So let them not think it's just for the team, but for them to embrace this fact that it's for them as well. And so for them to be involved in the sessions and for them to be part of this whole effort, right?
So, sport or psychology therapy is still kind of scary, right? People think that if they go into a therapist's office, and I still hear this stuff and I think, what? Like, that's not what therapy's about. But they'll be like, they're going to psychoanalyze me. They're going to tell me what's wrong with me. They're going to tell me that I'm doing this wrong. And oh my gosh. And, they're going to diagnose me. They're going to tell me I'm crazy. So people still have that kind of fear around an assessment aspect of psychotherapy, which is just absolutely not true at all. It is more that the tools and skills and allowing for your nervous system to optimize and peak performance in every area of your life, relationships, everything. And that's what therapy is about. It's not about us assessing and analyzing you. And I get it. It's so often the middle-aged kind of male past athlete. Now I'm coaching my kids' team. I still have the yips. I need to work this out. Terrified when they reach out to me. They're like, I still can't believe I reached out to you. I'm just like, wow. I mean, it's awesome, dude. Like, we're doing peak performance here. So there's that piece, right? So there's that stigma piece, that piece still sitting there. And then also, no one wants to be told that they're doing something wrong, and no one wants to just be on that space of like, oh my gosh, and I know that coaches often feel backed into a corner like this when, parents kind of ally together and come in and say, you're doing this, my kid, this. And so they get on the defense and they get very activated. And so then all of that coaches past stuff comes up, right? So that's another kind of piece here is that if anything, I would love for coaches to have their own clearing retirement kinds of work done, because I work with a lot of retired athletes because we're just clearing stuff up. Much like when I entered into doing the work, I cleared up all my past sports trauma stuff. And it was amazing. It really reset me to being happier or more fulfilled, because I wasn't very happy at the time when I started working on all my stuff. And I realized that I wasn't happy. And you don't know you're not happy until you've actually done the work and moved to a different state of mind. So that's another interesting thing about psychotherapy, is that sometimes we don't even know that we're not happy or living our fullest, most emotionally connected life until we're in that mental state now. So there's just all these pieces that, a coach can go in and clear all their past stuff, and then they don't have some of these blind spots and some of this resistance, because they can look back and look at memories that they may have stuffed down, which that's what we do. We're resilient, powerful beings. So we stuff down negative experiences, but they could go back and be like, oh my gosh, when my coach said this, it made me feel inferior. It made me feel like I was nothing. Wow. I didn't even remember that when I was 8 years old, And so then that informs their coaching. So they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to tell a kid that they're fat or slow or something like that, that they got called something negative that really hurt them. So there's kind of that piece too. It's like, we know that if you haven't done your work, you're going to get triggered by seeing these other things and other people bringing to the attention negative things. So, the parents of the 8-year-old coming at the coach going, oh, you said this. Well, I didn't mean to. Well, I'm doing the best I can. I'm working really hard. I don't even barely get paid for this, and they're like elevating. It's because that's some part of them that didn't get healed,
So as I'm hearing it, it's a matter of them shifting their nervous system and their thinking process from that sympathetic to parasympathetic, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And for a minute, if you would adorn your trainer hat on and just focus just a wee bit on the recovery side of athletes, right? Just to kind of, go full circle on that. Say techniques like using this game ready machine, the e-stimulation and all of that. Mm-hmm. Is that something that's enough? Or do you think athletes and the overall infrastructure, the system around them, do they need to focus on something else to be able to aid athletes in their recovery? Because what I'm seeing is a lot of times in the junior, like I'm a tennis parent, and a lot of times in the juniors, we would see, and this includes people that have played college tennis themselves, they would just put their kid in the car and leave right after a vigorous or rigorous training session, right? And even after a tournament match, and my kid would stand there and stretch and then get into the car. So there's some habits involved. There's some routine involved. So how important is all of that? And what is your 2 cents on the recovery process that any athlete should follow? I know the general indication is, okay, go take an ice bath.
So again, you're kind of like ramping up that nervous system and then all of a sudden just stopping, right? So you're not allowing for, like you said, some of that come down and that release. So
cool down.
So for one, with stretching, so this is another fingernails on chalkboard for me. And just for my basic kinesiology understanding is that an athlete needs to hold a stretch for over a minute, or else we're actually activating the sympathetic nervous system and the fight, flight, freeze midbrain. So you'll see very, very often like, 20 seconds here. Oh, this, and just no, that's actually making you less flexible. And it's sending a signal to those nocioreceptors, the electrical communication in the muscle to the midbrain, that we need to be on guard. We need to be all, oh no, something bad could happen again. So there's a way to, again, condition that fight, flight, freeze to be calmer through holding stretches over a minute. So there's a physical way to access that same sympathetic nervous system. So yes, if you are not spending, at least 10 minutes, because we know that kind of shifts our homeostasis. So you're in an activated sympathetic nervous system homeostasis. We want to deregulate it back down to that para, right? So 10 minutes of holding each stress for over a minute. And you're really going to use your timer and kind of like exaggerate even. And then adding in there the breath work. So I'm a big believer in yoga. I like yoga and not in the like potentially spiritual aspect when it comes to sports. It is holding those stretches and doing the deep belly breathing and allowing for the CO2 to be released from those muscles effectively and efficiently. So we have enough oxygen coming in to allow for the recovery, right? And combating some of that cortisol stress that's causing, one of the oxygen molecules to be pulled away from the cell, because there's 4 oxygen molecules. An antioxidant adds back an oxygen molecule, free radical, cortisol stress. So the sympathetic, after they just got done playing, oxidative stress, it'll yank one away. Well, the cell can still live with 1 gone, but it gets 2 gone and it dies. So we need to kind of allow for that hyperoxygenation after we're tough workout, whatever that looks like. And so often they'll stretch before but not after, like you said, a competition or even training. Oh man, I'm so hot, I'm going to leave now. And it's like, no, this is when we should be doing another kind of cool down practice. But it's an amazing time too. So there's some other little shifts here to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system. Whistling, chanting, humming, belly breathing. Humming is my favorite with my athletes. I'm always telling them if they're feeling they're getting to that fight, flight, freeze, they're getting anxious, just hum. And it's going to engage that parasympathetic. So there's little shifts. And that's why I said, if you stand in front of a sports team and tell them some of these little tricks or mental things, it's like, how much is that going to positively impact their playing, their length of their career, their happiness? And again, not trying to counter what the coach is doing, just adding to, the positive amount of resources these kids are getting.
And what is the role of, say, rest in the recovery process? And when I say rest, I know we touched upon sleep just a little bit earlier on in the conversation page, but I guess I'm trying to also focus on, say, when they are in competition, when they are in, say, like a swim season or whatever that might be, right? Whatever sport it might be, basketball, baseball, tennis, whatever that is, football. Say, if they are playing back to back, what is the role of, say, the support system in ensuring that there's enough rest so they are not injured and they can perform at their best?
Well, and this is the interesting thing too. When we start to look at youth sports, we're almost pushing them harder than professionals. If you look at the athletic trainers and the Major League Baseball group of athletic trainers that kind of head some of what they're doing with their athletes, like in Major League Baseball, they don't even train during the season. I mean, they train and then they're rolling because they have a game and a game and a game and a game. So it's all about recovery with them. Hockey, very similar. I mean, they're not going to train during the season. There's no time for it. They need as much rest as possible. So it is interesting when you see these young athletes, they're pushing them harder than the professionals. So I don't know why. And their bodies are, building up, right? Your growing is so stressful on the body, and there just isn't enough osteoclast activity. So you get these kids with stress fractures and all sorts of things because the body will pull that calcium from the bone if it's not getting enough. Right. And so these kids, I've had gymnasts, runners, all sorts of young athletes who have stress fractures in their spine because their body's pulling that calcium. So scary stuff there. But the thing about, overtraining syndrome, and we know a lot with females, of course, too. We used to call it the female triad, but now it's like males as well, that we're completely zapping their hormones because they're training too much and the body just doesn't have enough time to recover. And so yeah, there's actually over here at University of Washington, they're doing a lot on looking at females' hormones and some of what the training cycles are because it's too much. So when they're growing, they're going to need more rest. And so unfortunately with, again, this sports culture, we have this like, push it as hard as you can. We want to be better than the other team. And I would just love it if some of these leagues, like one of the coaches just takes a stand and be like, I'm not going to do it like the other ones. Let's see who ends up on top, and adds in more of this.
Yeah, I would really applaud that coach if you can tell me one.
Good luck. Yeah. No, but it's so scary, right? So it's so scary to do something different. But yeah, so there's that piece. Also, we know, and this is a big realization that's came with some of these integrative medical doctors that are going out of the box of understanding here too with the sleep thing. There's all this kind of like weird, I don't know, misinformation out there about like, oh, all you need is 5 hours. Well, I've always been fine with 5 hours of sleep. I'm totally fine. It's like, no, we know at 5 hours of sleep or less, you already have neuroinflammation. If you already have inflammation in your body, there's no possible way that you can really gain. You can't make gains. Your brain is inflamed. Your nervous system's inflamed. When our brain's inflamed, we can't focus. We have a hard time sleeping. And that's mental illness symptoms come forward with brain inflammation. All this stuff with COVID, Dr. Daniel Amen has seen that the limbic brain, so our emotional brain in the middle, is hot. It's inflamed. And so this is scary stuff. We don't want any brain inflammation. That's what creates the inability to flush that tau protein and the toxins. And so that's the buildup of any of these neurocognitive or CTE or any of these diseases. So when I'm looking at athletes that are heading soccer balls and playing contact sports, my gosh, if you're not getting 5 hours of sleep or more, We're already looking at your potential of developing one of these neurocognitive diseases. So terrifying. So 8 hours of sleep then at 8, we know that's what we need to recharge our dopamine and serotonin. Our brain can't function without enough dopamine and serotonin. So of course we're going to have, again, these mental illness symptoms. So we need at least 8. Then if you look at a developing, growing athlete, and yes, you're growing till you're 25, and that's when you start to decline and not build up as fast. So again, all the way through college, right? So we need like 10 hours of sleep is what these kids need, but they're not getting it. And you're right, they're not getting it. I had a swim client, 11-year-old, and every time we get on, she's going, I'm just tired a lot. My practice doesn't get out till 9:00. And I have to be up for school at 6:30. And I'm just like, but again, I have no control over when her practice is held. I have no control, and so it's like this resistance to, an 11-year-old practice till 9:00 at night. Whoa, that's a lot.
I guess that's where the quality over quantity emphasis comes in, right? I think for them to just focus and give their best for an hour is probably better than them just lingering there for like 3 hours and not really, doing their best. Back in a moment with our guest on Freshly Forever. And so here comes, I think you are just now taking me to this very passionate area for me, and that's the nutrition side of it, right? The nutrition, mind and body. And you are an expert in assessing the role of nutrigenomics and how one size fits all is not truly applicable, right? And then the SNPs come in, the single nucleotide polymorphism and the epigenetics. Can you talk about all of that, Paige? And again, one question, if I would ask, we talked about quality over quantity. When it comes to the gym, our athletes, and you talked about how stress fractures happen. So just as a quick follow-up to that, what happens with like all this weight training and things like that, right? Again, where is the delineation between quality over quantity? And again, the in-season versus off-season and things like that.
Well, when it comes to weight training alone, so our strength training piece, this is another thing my coach taught me. I mean, this was so many years ago now. It was almost, 20 years ago when I had that amazing coach in college. But it was like, you only need 2 days of weights a week, because we know the literature tells us that at 2 days a week, we are still making gains. That's enough. And so these teams that are going in 5 days a week to weight train, we don't need that. So, I mean, it's that kind of stuff of like, there is literature to support what we're talking about, but why some individuals are not going that route, or the fear of doing something so different that your players won't be strong enough or skilled enough or whatever that looks like, is so strong that it keeps us from being like, this is the literature. And it's really the same thing with nutrition and some of that, right? Like, we know all this stuff. When I'm talking to people about the SNPs, because I have the pure genomic software, so I have people do the 23andMe and like, hey, we can look at this. We can really see, is your kid ADD? Would they do well with having some of these amino acids to allow for more foundational to dopamine or serotonin? And you talk to people about that, and they're just kind of like, oh, I don't know if we need that. It's like, that is huge information when we're creating, what the kid needs, what foods they need, what's going to make them most efficient, what's going to make them most effective. If they have a folate issue, well, they're not going to be able to have that foundational folate to make the serotonin. So of course they're going to be depressed. It's just stuff like that. But yeah, it's interesting how many people, we have this knowledge, but we just do not embrace it. And it's like, again, very confusing. And I'm understanding that not everyone's going to sit down with a peer-reviewed study and be able to assess and analyze it as to what they should be applicably doing. But really, there are qualified professionals, like you just said, with the nutrition piece and the S&P. Like, okay, you probably know way more about it than I do. It's not my primary specialization, but there are people out there. So it's really that understanding how influential these things are, because if we don't have enough dopamine, we know even that starts to turn into Parkinson's potentially, or exacerbating, ADD symptoms and all of those pieces that we don't want our children to have to go through. So if we can just do these things to see and be able to give the proper supplements, the proper food, and even some of the gut stuff that we're assessing these days about what foods are kind of slightly even inflame our system. Well, yeah, we should probably avoid those. We have all of this at our hands. I mean, it's right here. So to me, it's very frustrating, especially when individuals have the financial ability to look at these things. They can really set their children up for, optimal health throughout their lifespan here. And then just the decrease. We know so much with Daniel Amen's work around mental illness and foods and toxins. And, he's looked for years at these brain scans and seen these areas that are inflamed particularly. You cut out certain foods, you add in certain supplements, and that inflammation goes down. So when we have hyperactive inflammation in certain regions, those correlate with mental illness symptoms. So this is huge because, yes, we want the kids to play well. Yes, we want them to be able to make gains. But we want them to be successful, happy, well-adjusted humans. That's a huge component of this, that they're not fighting with their coaches or their teammates if we know that their limbic brain is not fired up and inflamed. That's interpersonal stuff. That's taking things too personally and in all of those pieces. So we know that those things translate to positive relationships, a more positive ability to be a team player on that team. So this stuff is just, and then when we look at chemicals, my goodness, we know that we really don't know what some of these additives and preservatives and chemicals, the negative long-term effects of them. So when I have these high schoolers just like, oh my gosh, they walk into my office with Taco Bell, a pile of Taco Bell like this, I have to eat this because then I have practice. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, hey, how about, at least go to the organic sandwich shop. Let's at least go there. If you're on the spectrum of acceptance commitment therapy here of like, can we just agree on this? No more Taco Bell or McDonald's, please. But I understand you're under a time crunch. Go get this. So it is huge. It is huge. And then also we know that we're really at a deficit a lot with our minerals and nutrients because our soil is so overused, right? So that's another big piece. And, when you start talking about minerals to people and the glandular system, so that has to do with their adrenals and them losing their energy while playing and all those pieces. So it's like, I think that we need a ton of minerals. And they've talked about even kids being born with certain high levels of lead in some of these things because those glands will take up the closest mineral on the periodic table, thinking it's like lead. The body kind of thinks, oh, this is iron because it's really similar. So, if we're deficient in iron, we could be heavy in lead. So it's that kind of thing. And when you talk to people about this, it's like, oh my gosh, I never even knew that. It's like, well, why aren't we teaching this in like basic science for high schoolers? It's like just at least this nutrition piece. Because taking a, mineral supplement is really not that difficult. So a lot.
Yeah, I think it would really benefit these teams, like say, you talk about high school. Okay, right from middle school on or elementary, if the family can enforce it even better, right? Because it's ingrained in the child, it's ingrained in the athlete while he or she grows up. But as far as infrastructure, when it comes to, I'm sure professional teams do it, but when it comes to the collegiate level, I think it might help if they focus on, say, missing a practice session, but then instead, even there's like so many people doing all these pro bono stuff, right? Invite someone that can come and talk on a voluntary basis and have them talk to you all as a team. And that way, it really can make an impact on the athletes rather than, them kind of, somewhere reading it or because I think there are so many audio visual learners and I think it'll make a lot of impact for them to see a presentation or hear from someone. And so if you were to say the trait categories that make it necessary for all this nutrigenomics, really, the role of it. And then in a nutshell, okay, what is it that you would like, you having been an athlete, for athletes to focus on? Say again, 2 cents worth on that in terms of, okay, hey, minimally focus on this for you to be able to achieve peak performance.
So I would say the psychological piece first, then the nutritional piece, because if we are in a self-sabotaging, because we all know, McDonald's candy is not good for us. There's not one child that's even like 6 years old that knows they only get a little bit of candy. Candy's the thing. They know they have to eat their peas. They know that, if we work on that psychological piece first. So if we integrate the psych piece and then into high school, integrating in having that psych also, and then the nutrition piece, that's kind of what we're looking at here. So at basic middle school psych, then going into psych nutrition, because the habitual resourcing behaviors with food, because food is attachment, food is security. And so there's so much of, because I've had so many binge eating disorder clients when it comes to the weight sports, the aesthetic sports, they say females, 62% have an eating disorder. I had an eating disorder because my coach was telling us we had to be 120 pounds in high school. Ridiculous. Which was no scientific backing whatsoever. But, so it is really that right the transition into high school and understanding how we're using food, and addressing the psych piece first, then going into psych and nutrition, because they kind of have to work hand in hand. And so I'm a part of this organization called Voice in Sports, and it's a female platform for female athletes. And we have nutritionists, we have professional athletes and college athlete mentors, and then we have sports psychs. And so athletes can sign up for free. Female athletes can sign up for free. All of us give out free group sessions. We give out free team sessions. We give out free one-on-ones. And then
how wonderful.
Yeah. And then beyond that, you can, hire us on there or whatever that looks like. But the other interesting thing with that is the CEO of it, amazing, powerful woman. She worked for Nike for years and came off and created this platform because she saw these, just like we're talking about, these missing pieces, especially with females. Female athletics do not get the money males do in college or in high school or any of these things. The males are the ones that are getting the sports psychs and some of these pieces above the females at this point in time, unfortunately. But so she left there to create this platform. But, she has been trying to partner with some of these universities and with all these clubs and stuff. And she's getting this resistance and this pushback that we were just talking about, the cultural piece. And it's interesting because she's like, yeah, colleges are the worst. I'm like, I know. They think they've checked their box. They have a nutritionist or dietitian at the hospital. So if they have a serious issue, they can send them there. So it's very a reactive kind of model still, and so we're trying to make it a proactive model. Here are these resources. Exactly. So in a perfect world, kind of starting out with the psych, and because sports psychs were very, that integrative piece of the nutrition piece, we are trained in that because we have that exercise science piece and the psych piece. So we're trained in it to an extent, and then you get more refined high school. And then you've really set these kids up. And then, of course, in the colleges, it'd be great if they all have nutritionists. And I know some of the big ones do, but not all of them. And again, how can one possibly handle, especially individualized care? That's just not realistic.
Well, that's probably where all these voluntary services, at least the institutions that are not able to afford those things can take advantage of. And what about, you talk so much about the nervous system, right? How does it respond when it comes to beverages like coffee and tea? And so many athletes love that. Coffee especially.
I'm always surprised at how many young teenagers. I got 13-year-olds that are telling me that they're slamming a Monster drink and that they're going to Starbucks during. I'm like,
it's a grande at Starbucks, right?
Oh my goodness! I didn't start drinking coffee until I was like 25. So I certainly was not one that was introduced to a stimulant to try to trigger my adrenals. But we do know that caffeine it binds to calcium in the digestive process. So we already know that even if the kid is having, milk or dairy for breakfast, they're not getting that calcium. I'm sure you know this. The calcium binds in the digestive process. So I do a little bit of psychoed about that, the caffeine is an issue. But it's another sign that we know that they are trying to trigger cortisol because they're already kind of going into this fight, fight, freeze, and they think that they will be more on, right? So we know that's dysregulation in general. And then weaning off of a stimulant, right? So that's going to be like a month to 2 months after you quit a stimulant is going to make you tired. Your body's going to have to get back to that natural cycle. Yeah. So yeah, very scary. And then another piece that I guess we didn't completely talk about though is the electronic devices and how our Wi-Fi, electric devices, all this stuff on all night is actually triggering our subcortex also and causing cortisol, serotonin to be released all night. So these kids aren't getting very quality sleep. So I'm talking to them about turn off the Wi-Fi router, turn off all your electronic devices, take off the iPhone watch, no, like all of these things. And so that's another piece that we need that education on, that we have a lot of educators out there that are doing these talks and involved in that. And there's Risa Suzuki. She's an EMF expert because she started to get really ill working in the Microsoft complex over here because of all of the EMFs and stuff. And so she learned about that and started really researching it and looking at, again, the peer-reviewed studies that show these things. So just minor things that the kids can do that will make them not as tired when they wake up, right? If they're getting quality sleep. And then so many of them, so if you have them turn off all that stuff at night, and I'm like, okay, you watch, all that stuff's completely turned off. You're going to sleep and you're going to have dreams and you're going to feel amazing. And so that's always kind of that aha moment with some of them when you have, and adults, we're just as bad. So I'm always telling people, turn it all off. But yeah, so just all these pieces.
Yeah, you brought into limelight yet another passionate topic of mine, which is the radiation aspect and the devices. I think up until the point when my child used to live here with us, her phone was always on airplane mode at night, and that really was helpful. Of course, now we worry about each other, and with her in college, it's perhaps not 100% doable because we always want that connectivity. But definitely, at least at the barest minimum, try to put it as far away from your bedside as possible and not, keep it underneath your pillow. No, that's not the way to go.
No.
Hey, like we all have to disengage to the extent that we need to, right? And going on to brain spotting, the audio-visual entrainment piece, and the cranioelectric stimulation.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. Whatever you can just talk about all this, Paige, I think that'll be fantastic.
Basically, with brain spotting, so Dr. David Grand, the creator of it, he was trained in hypnotherapy, somatic experience, neurolinguistic programming, focused mindfulness, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And what he did was he took aspects of all of those psychotherapies and put them together to create brain spotting. So with brain spotting, you listen to the bilateral sound. So it's a sound coming like the, the tick, tick, tick back and forth, right? With hypnotherapy. So that's that piece. So we activate the subcortex. So this area, the limbic brain, where I was saying that we hold on to our emotions, where we can access certain memories that were emotional and traumatic to us. So you're listening to headphones with those sounds. Then we are manipulating your visual path. In identifying where there's a reflexive cue, so a weakness in our nervous system associated with when you're telling us about a traumatic experience or a stressful experience or the pressure of wanting to do well during the weekend, during your tournament. All of those things will trigger our nervous system to where we will find a reflexive cue with the eyes. So that's kind of that EMDR piece. And it also engages our brain stem. So the second cranial nerve within our body is associated with our eyes. Every time our eyes move, it is sending an impulse through our entire brain. So anytime you're triggering the eyes, you are causing some reaction within the brain. So really cool stuff there with the eyes.
Okay. And in that case, even devices, that's probably what they are doing, correct?
Yes. And there's one of the only ways to really train the brain is vision therapy. So the Major League Baseball uses this right eye software where you're like blowing up spaceships with your eyes and stuff and doing all these games. And so it will increase your audio, visual, and physical reaction time because audio, visual, physical all work hand in hand. So when one is stronger, the other one lowers. So if you're doing physical, kinesthetic stuff, you're going to want to be training your eyes so that your eyes don't get as slow because your body's taking all that kinesthetic vestibular. So it's quite interesting. So, and that's one of the only ways to really increase your reaction time is training your eyes, training your brain that way. The brain is 60 to 80% visual. It's fascinating. So we're just learning so much at this point. We only know 10% of what the brain is capable of, say a lot of the big neuroscientists. So it's like, this is a whole, we've got a long way to go of just really understanding all this complex interworkings. Nonetheless, so we're manipulating the visual path that way. So we're looking for that weakness. So if you're like holding a pointer across someone's visual path, and even online, I do this online. So you're following it and you're thinking about like the coach who called you fat, and you'll see the body kind of wobble. And then you just sit on that point and you have them go through like, okay, bringing that activation, as we say, or the upset in your body, tell me more about what happened and why it was hurtful. And then you're having them access in your body. So the somatic experience piece, because we know fascia, it's Dr. Peter Levine's work. We know our fascia holds on to experience out of survival, right? So they'll sit there and be like, oh, it's in my chest. It's like, yeah, well, that's really common with that shocky response when someone hurts you or catches you off guard with something negative. And you're like, ooh, that hurt. So we're working on the link, the eyes, stimulating the midbrain. So that's the brain spotting piece. Then we sit here and focus mindfulness and allowing for every single thing to come up surrounding that. It's like, yeah, and then I was called fat again by a boyfriend, and then this is this. So your brain will automatically link up that trauma memory network so that you can fully reprocess any of the emotions that you didn't get to have in the moment. Because what happens when trauma happens is we react really quickly and we move on. That's resilience. That's how we have to work. Because we can't just like, second someone cuts us off, pull off on the side of the road and have a, screaming fit like, that was scary. We can't do that, So we come back and we reprocess those emotions and really that full content that we just had to stuff in the moment. So that's brain spotting. It's like a super therapy because it's got so many aspects. And then as clinicians, we link in there, the Freudian work of like, oh, well, when was the first time someone told you you were fat? Well, my mom used to tell me I was fat. So we're going back to all of these hurts and pains and making sure that we fully process them and allowed for that release in the nervous system so that it deregulates and gets us out of that sympathetic nervous system state.
So as I see it, it's an integration sort of between mindfulness and kind of hypnotherapy, correct?
The thing about it, when you put on those bilateral sounds, you get into that altered state. And it's not an altered state. You know how everyone's like, oh my gosh, no mind control. This is this. Well, as opposed to being therapist directed as much, it's client directed. So in hypnotherapy, you're telling them, well, we're going to go ahead and push that into a box. And we know that that's not true. We know our body's beautiful and whole. And, when it comes to like saying you're fat, instead, we're allowing for the brain and the client to identify all of the things that are attached to that and fully identify them within themselves and release them.
Wonderful.
And like with neuro-linguistic programming, what those guys found, because they were professors in California at a UC school, they found that there were certain ways that people looked depending on the type of memory they were bringing up. So that was interesting too, because sometimes we talk about like lower right side is where we'll bring up trauma. So sometimes people have identified that there are certain areas, but other times, no. Other times it's spontaneous where they'll look or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where does this electric stimulation, this cranioelectric stimulation come in?
The audiovisual entrainment is you put the cranial electrical stimulation on the ears. And so between the sounds, so it's like a thud, 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 or whatever frequency. So the audiovisual entrainment is utilizing the same frequencies as the brainwave frequencies, but it's delivering them through sound and light and impulse, so electricity. So between those three ways of delivering those brainwaves, we are trying to balance. So based off the symptoms, it's a really cool device. It's called Mind Alive is the company. Anyone can buy one. They're fabulous. They're like user easy, there's a booklet. And so if someone has insomnia, for instance, the program for that, you put on the insomnia program and it is going to be flashing lights, the sounds thudding, and then a little or electrical impulses, as I wrote my earring up. And so what that's doing is it's in training where we know that sleep frequency within our brain, within our brain waves, it's in training that frequency to get the brain to go there. And so it's training your brain to be able to be in that. And it's typically parasympathetic is what we talk about, because it's bringing you down the whole time. When it comes to focus, it's going to put you right up there a little bit with beta, so that you're alert and focused and the frontal lobe's being populated. So we know when in training with sounds and lights and the impulse that you can shift the brain state almost instantly. So these devices are amazing. The guy's a sound engineer. He's out of Canada. He's been doing it for 37 years. And so he's got so much data around QEEG brain scans to prove what he's doing. And the other thing that we see with trauma with that is that the HPA axis on a QEEG, so our glandular system, it will flatline after a concussion or severe trauma. So it's like the brain is just like, oh my gosh, I can't even manage this glandular system anymore. We're just going to run on cortisol. Brings you back online. Sometimes after one session of the audiovisual entrainment, it'll bring back that energy in our glandular system. So again, hormones, the sleep piece. We see so many people who've had, head injuries, lots of trauma. They're stuck in this mystery illness state in athletes too. I see this very often with athletes because they push their body so hard. They were overtraining. And so, they're in their early 30s and they have this mystery illness of chronic fatigue and all these things going on. And it's because they need, tune back up. We got to reprocess all this stuff to deregulate their amygdala, get them living in parasympathetic. We got to put the audiovisual entrainment on them to get their glandular system back on track, to get their brain waves balanced again. It's really, we can undo a lot of things. It's amazing.
Probably functional medicine practitioners use this also, right? Because there's so much of autoimmune illnesses and so much that it's interesting. You talked about polarity at the very beginning of our conversation. And I guess the shift in polarity, as I heard you say, happens because of the transition from the parasympathetic to the sympathetic state, correct? And this shift in polarity, it even leads to autoimmune illnesses.
Yes,
correct?
Absolutely. And so that's why, you'll get these individuals who have been to every expert in the world. They've done this, they've detox their body. They're down to eating 5 foods. They're getting colonics. They're like all of these things they've done to try to get their body back to wellness. And even if they've done basic talk therapy where they've talked about how stressful the illness is and made some linked up connections of family system stuff. And yes, but they haven't really gone back and done the trauma reprocessing, and they haven't entrained their brain waves to try to get your brain out of the homeostasis of dysfunction or dysregulation it's in. And so when you're talking to people about that, it's like, well, we need to detrain all of this trauma response, and then we need to entrain with this audiovisual entrainment. So that's kind of where I work with people when I do chronic illness. And I get a lot of people who are very desperate when they're Googling around and see some buzzwords. They're like, hey, can you help me? It's like, I probably can.
So it's a combination of brain spotting and this audiovisual entrainment. Kind of de-stress and then bring them back to homeostasis. Is that correct? Fantastic. On to the much needed focus on mental health of athletes. We talked about it earlier. You brought it up already in terms of your examples and everything. Why is this coming into the limelight only now, Paige? We hear Simone Biles, we hear Naomi Osaka, we hear Marty Fish amongst the tennis players that have come out with their mental well-being. And how can we break this stigma? You talked about that earlier, that we need to break the stigma. And how can we bring this much needed focus?
Well,
and I know you also talked about the signs of deterioration too, the sleep, the irritability perhaps, say that translates to low energy, eating changes. And when physical injuries can get the much needed focus, why not mental health?
Well, it's sports culture. And it's also, again, you don't know you are in dysregulation oftentimes because you are functioning. And I'll show on I have this in trainings that I do. I have this whole spectrum, right? So we got the sympathetic up here and the parasympathetic. Right here, they can still function. They're not necessarily really happy, not necessarily really sad, still doing okay with sports performance. but they haven't had the last straw that's broke the camel's back, so to speak, right? So they haven't had the last trauma. They haven't had the, and so a lot of athletes kind of sit here. And until something pretty traumatic happens, until they reach a certain age too, where their body just can't handle it anymore and their sports is truly declining and they're starting to really notice that it's out of their control, they won't seek help. But that's the average person. Until something's really bad, until they can't function, do they seek help? We are not in a very proactive.
Is that the perfectionist mindset then that kind of impedes them? Hey, okay, I really want to be this most wonderful athlete that will be, so talked about all over the world. And so I really don't want to reveal this side of myself. After all, I've been so successful that I really don't want to talk about it. Is that the reason for things not coming out? Or is it the support system? Because we always need to focus on people being able to help, right? The surroundings have to facilitate a lot of things around an athlete.
So as I'm sitting here, I've got multiple parents who have came through on my iPad over here. I'm seeing saying, hey, my kid needs a session. Hey, my kid needs this. Well, the athlete's not reaching out. So yes, it is their support system. Their parents are saying, hey, they need a tune-up. We got a ski comp this weekend, blah, blah, blah. So in my experience, I've only had a very, very few athletes reach out themselves. It has typically been their support system and their family observing these things, worried, seeing that these symptoms are occurring, knowing that their kid can do better, has done better. So it is that support system piece. So I say that the onus a lot of times is on the parents in normalizing and kind of even making their child. I get some teenage athletes that they will agree, the kids will agree with the parent, because again, the parent reaches out, they broke their back, this is going on, they're breaking down every night, blah, blah, blah. And the kid comes to me and they just they don't want to be here because it is that perfectionist, it's that high performer, but they don't know what it feels like to not be in the feelings they are right now. They're in this nervous system state. They don't know they can feel better. It's really hard to remember oh, I felt amazing back when. We don't always remember that. I mean, even if we sit here and think in our mind going back to, oh, when was the last time that I felt fabulous and free and no pressure in my life? It's very hard to just recall these things. Plus, understanding that in sports, it is stressful, it is hard, it is work, because those pieces are present. They have to be. We have to have dedication, discipline, and work. We can't just be my mental health, I'm tired today, I'm not going to practice. We can't do that. You know what I mean? So there's still this structure of sport that it is difficult. And so when you get these kids coming in, they are within this mindset that they're hustling, they're working harder, that it's stressful, that pain is, gained and all these kinds of things. So it's still just all this kind of culture stuff with that. So until they start to feel better. So then after the session, it's whoa, I feel weird. Whoa, I feel lighter. Oh, you're yeah, you feel better, but they don't know that they don't feel okay. Really, none of us know. Then the other piece is when you look at a professional athlete and you see it all the time, and we saw it with Colin Kaepernick standing up for diversity, equity, and inclusion years ago, his career was ruined because he spoke out, because he took a stand. He never got another, just terrible. The guy was a brilliant athlete.
Yeah, that was awful.
So that is scary, right? Do we want to push against the system? Do we want to push against culture? So it's a little bit of that, as well as if you get seen as a head case, that's the language I've heard, or a wild card, or a hazard, or, there's a lot of languaging around it. If an athlete comes out and says, yeah, I've had mental health struggles, this, the people signing the contracts and pulling people on the team, oh, this person's going to be a risk. We don't want them on our team. He's came out and said he's crazy. And again, that's terrible. That's absolutely not the case that I believe, but I know that sports culture is still saying that. And so it's that. So the athletes you see speaking out right now have enough fame, have enough success that they can. And then the other thing, because they're not going to lose their sponsors. And I bet you, remember when Naomi started talking, people were outraged. They were aggressive. They were abusive towards her. They were, wow. I don't know if I could have tolerated all the abuse that she took, to be completely honest. She took.
Yeah, we need to realize athletes are human and they're normal people. And I guess you pointed out parents often come to you seeking help. Again, I think with all due respect to the rest of the support system, say coaches, the training staff, I think everyone needs to facilitate mental well-being, correct?
Yes.
And there probably is like so much of this component, or maybe at least there is some component of aggressive behavior in the locker rooms that kind of maybe even contributes to this situation. Is that a right assessment, or am I wrong? I mean, correct me if something else is the picture there.
Sports are a competition. There's always someone waiting. And so that's another piece too. You've got to be tough, and you've got to sit there and not, back down, essentially, right? So there's an aspect here that this is a competition. You have to not show that it bothers you when your teammates just like, yeah, you missed all of those in practice. I hope the coach doesn't take you out. I mean, like, whoo, that digs. Those are digs. That's not supportive. That's not, but it's Darwinian, like sports are a competition. So it's a different kind of environment. And so is like getting into colleges. I see that a lot with these youth athletes too. It's just so intense. And they'll be walking around college going, did you know who got into Duke? Who applied to Duke? But I mean, it's just like this whole, who's better? Who's this?
It's not even that. Okay, look at Instagram. Oh, somebody posted that they accepted this offer.
And I got rejected. I know.
Oh, it's just like, it's crazy. And sometimes you just have to completely tune out and probably just for the sake of mental well-being, completely shut yourself off from social media. And that's not a bad idea.
And my recommendation oftentimes with athletes is stay away from your teammates, especially my individual athletes, because yes, you're on the same U.S. team when you're but you're not really. They want your spot. You're in competition with them. So to protect your energy, before that comp, I want you off in the corner. I want you, stretching on your own, humming, giving yourself compliments, pumping yourself up, doing belly breath. It's like, I want you doing all the things that are going to tune up your nervous system and telling yourself this is going to be the best day in your comp ever. Because when you're around each other, you're feeling each other's energy. It's a intense environment. So when you're on a team together and vying for, that playing time and stuff, it's intense. So this is all pressure, stress, unconscious stuff. Little digs, projections. So sometimes you're like, well, let's see how you play today because, you weren't doing very good in practice. You're like, whoa, it's like that stuff's going on. And it's
what then is the role of empathy? Say, forget about the teens or forget about, people of the same age. I guess empathy should be there for every individual. What about the rest of the support system? Or what is the role of empathy in ensuring mental well-being of athletes?
And sometimes, I get a lot of parents ask me, like, how can I best support them? I'll get these texts from parents just like, are we doing something wrong? I know she's really struggling. And it's like, yeah, well, you can't throw them on your back and do the work for them. So what you're going to do is you're going to sit out here and you're just going to be there. Right? Like most of the time, these kids don't need a parent to be like, well, you needed to be closer to the plate when you were up to bat. I saw you were so far away. No wonder that was going on. No. It's like the kids need their parents to be the safe, soft space that they can literally just sit there and vent. They don't need any interjection or coaching or any of that because they're already going through it in their mind. They've already heard the coach. They're just completely overwhelmed, upset, especially when they get into the car and they lost or they made some mistakes during the game. The parents just need to literally be like, all right, do you want to dump and vent? It's okay if you cry and stuff. I'm not going to give any intervention. I just want you to be able to dump it all out and have us be there for you. And so that's the best advice for parents. And they think, oh my gosh, but that's not helping them. It's like, no, that's helping them more than you will ever know. It's just thinking about like when the 2-year-old went over and, slammed their finger in the door and is just having this out and out like hysteria bawling. You're not going to sit there and be like, well, that's why you don't put your finger in the door. What do you think about it? No, you pick them up and rock them and hold them and let them process those emotions.
Yeah. Tell me about that postmortem that all of us, naturally tend to do right after games. But I just had to, a lot of times as a parent, I had to tell myself, hey, you know what? We are not going to talk about it right now. we are not going to do it. So it's an aspect of conditioning also. And, seeing what the other person needs and feels, I think is very crucial to ensuring or contributing to the well-being aspect, I feel.
And I see, so this is the other thing too. So sometimes I'll see the parents when a kid is struggling, or in a concussion particularly, because you're kind of not there. When we've got these older kids with post-concussion syndrome, they've had multiple concussions, they're overwhelmed, they're tired, they've got cognitive fatigue, all this stuff going on. Well, I've seen parents line up their schedule even tighter. Like, well, we have a physics tutor, then we have a math tutor. I'm going, wait. No. They need to take a step back. The stress is contributing to these symptoms. The stress is contributing to the mental health issues. Let's take a step back. Let's talk to the teachers. Because again, this is where you work. When you're working with a sports psych or a psych, we can advocate for your kid. So if things are going down, we can sit here and contact the school and get the pressure to pull off a little bit, because they need time and space to heal. So sometimes, your inclination is to be like, well, let's set up order. Let's make things good. Let's put them to bed at this time, just in more intervention because you care so much. But it's like, no, pull back off. They need a minute. And so it's that kind of piece too, when you're working with, tragedy, like a family member dying or something, and the parents just kind of expecting the kid to just go right back out there. It's kind of like, or someone in the family has cancer. I've got a couple of clients right now where the parents are sick. And it's like, no, it's like, I will contact the school all day and be like, no, this kid, they're going through some trauma right now. Like, I don't care. This is what I'm advocating for. This is what's best. So it's that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And again, improper behavior as well. That's another whole side to it, right? We had this whole thing going on with the USA gymnastics team and so much of that stuff. I think, we all need to do better as parents, as support system, as coaches, as training staff, and the athlete themselves. I think communication is the key.
And another piece with these kids who are victimized, and I've seen a lot of this unfortunately, I've seen a lot of this inappropriate behavior with young athletes, is that, and it's like, I have the hard conversations with my young teen athletes about this kind of stuff. I'll be like, they'll ask me questions. It's kind of funny. Like, I had one of my clients ask me like, well, what went on with like the USA gymnastics? Like, they don't completely understand what happened. Mm-hmm. We're talking like a 9-year-old here. And I'm going, well, the doctor, when they were doing these things, they did something inappropriate. They stuck their hands in places that didn't, your private parts that are not okay. It's never okay. So if anyone ever touches you there, it is not okay. I don't care if they tell you it's okay, it is not. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if these conversations are always being had. And again, would be another appropriate place for a clinician, social worker in sport, whatever it may be, in middle school to talk about those boundaries. Because I don't think the parents even dream of the fact that their kid could be victimized by these individuals who have taken the USA sport this and taken all these trainings. It doesn't even cross your mind sometimes. You think like, what? My goodness, the swim club down the street? Like, no, not my kid. So it's informing the kids, because those girls didn't know, a lot of them. I truly believe they didn't. They were just young. They didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm. It's awful. I don't want to name the school, but there was this school that we toured with our daughter, and that's in the West Coast. It's a very, very famous school. And right when I walk in, and we are just going around, this campus, and I see on a bulletin board, it says, compensation for those victims from blah, 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 way back 80s or 90s, whatever, a settlement has been reached. And this is like the doctor, the doctor who is there in that school that these girls would go to. And I believe it was the OBGYN.
Right.
So I guess it's a question of parents having that conversation and whomever in the support system. And I remember a pediatrician telling my kid, hey, all these things are inappropriate. And she was very little when she had that conversation with her. And so I guess it's really important. And I'm thankful that someone was able to educate my child on that. And the fact that we have had several open conversations on several topics. I think it's a matter of, how open you are able to be and how, again, it's like open lines of communication. I think everything finally comes down to this aspect of communication. And my motto in life is express yourself. Don't fear the worst. Hey, just handle it. Be polite. Do not be rough about it. Do not be disrespectful. That's wrong. But feel free to express yourself in as polite a fashion as you can, because you just need to make your feelings known, right?
Well, and the other thing with some of this power and control in an entrusted position, again, the kids don't always know what's appropriate or not. When you have the coach tell the kids, swearing at them, telling them they're this, and they're lazy and they're this. The kids, if they have been experiencing that all this time, they think that's what sports are. And you're just like, oh, no. So it is some of that as well, of just the pre-work of talking to your kids like, hey, if your coach ever says something that hurts your feelings or this is this, and you got to do a little bit of pre-work when you're dropping your kid off at practice. And some of the coaches don't allow the parents to be at practice. And I get why to an extent, but then there's another part of me that's just like, well, why? I always let the parents stand right there when I was teaching swimming and stuff. I loved it. It was this collaborative. They saw what we were doing. We saw what the kid went through that day, what we were talking about, like everything. I had nothing to hide, so to speak. So you just kind of, I'm all about social workers. Our number one job is to protect children. That's what we take a vow to do. So this is very important to me that these kids are not being harmed at all.
Yeah. And I think it's one thing when the parents are like, highly demonstrative of what they want. And, I know it's interfering, and I see that point from the coach's angle. But on the same token, for the child to know that, hey, I have someone here standing,
a resource,
and I know that person got my back, no matter what, win or lose. Yep. I think that's the biggest comfort zone, and that's going to, I always feel that helps them perform better. I'm not saying, one has to be there 100% of the time, just let them be who they are. But on the same token, that involvement is certainly something, I think it's that soft corner, right? So, and you are working on a docuseries on this. And so why don't you share that, Paige? And in closure, any tips for athletes to feel better every single day? The role of your team, you work with Carla, and you guys, your efforts as a team, and your contact info and all of the good stuff.
Yeah. And so I work with Carla. So Carla is a nutritionist. She's trained. She's a lawyer from Croatia, is her total background, but she's a nutritionist out of her own dancing experience and yoga experience of, again, this disordered eating being interlaced within that sport, essentially dance, right? And then she also does that yoga piece, and really is more sports yoga, like I talked about, holding the poses for over a minute. So she handles that component. And then, of course, I handle more of that deconditioning and conditioning with the athletes. And so with that, though, what I give as tools, I have 60 shifts. So 60 ways to shift your nervous system. And so just the primary ones that are the most important to me is smiling. So if we smile, we are automatically engaging our parasympathetic, our theta wave, and getting rid of this beta sympathetic nervous system. So I'm telling all my athletes to just smile. Even if you don't feel like smiling, you start smiling and you keep smiling because you're instantly shifting your brain state. Another one, I love the belly breathing. And sometimes the athletes, this one's a better one, just like after practice or before they're going to sleep or something, and pooching the entire belly out and then all the way like deflated like a balloon, because we have a lot of CO2 debt in there, as well as another way to instantly shift into more parasympathetic. Sometimes the athletes report, like if they're doing the belly breathing and stuff before competition, they feel like they're hyperventilating or get kind of dizzy. So I'm a little careful with that one, depending on, the read of it. And then the other thing is the humming. I told you, humming is so amazing. It's a vibrational frequency that allows, again, for the shifting of the brain state to the theta and then that sympathetic nervous system. And then the other thing is I really like for the athletes to listen to the bilateral sounds, which are available multiple different types on my front page of my website. And listening to those sounds every day after practice and taking like a sheet of paper and writing out all the things that didn't serve them about that day and the things that they thought that they messed up on. And even after games, and do that for 10 minutes and then tear it up and throw it away. To get it out of the brain. Because the more and more that things circulate in our mind, they become more and more distorted and essentially traumatize our own brainstem. So I really like that practice as well. And then also I love for athletes to create mantras. So the second that they start to go down, it's kind of the cognitive behavior piece of, oh my gosh, I'm going to do bad. I'm nothing. Oh man, everyone's doing better than me. Anytime we get down one of those holes when we're out there trying to play, I want you to instantly say the mantra over and over and over and over and over again until we stop that path. And so oftentimes it's like, I've got this, I got this, I got this. I trained for this, I trained for this, I trained for this. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And it'll instantly pop them back up. And then another thing that I really like is the visualization. So we know there's lots of literature at this point in time within around visualization that in the first study was bicep curls. So the individuals were doing every single day, they were visualizing doing these bicep curls, then they were doing the bicep curls, and then the control group was just doing bicep curls and were not visualizing. We know the group that was visualizing and doing the action were actually gaining more strength. I mean, amazing. So the mind is so powerful because the mind will absolutely reassociate those neuromuscular pathways when we are thinking about it. So I love for my kids to just visualize, maybe they're going to practice sitting in the car, want them to shut their eyes and see and feel themselves doing the actions with precision, because we know that that is strengthening in the brain and the body, those neural pathways. And it's really one of the foundational, is positive sports imagery is kind of the languaging around it, but it's one of the most positive ways of strengthening those peak performance, precision moves. And then also, like I said, with the parents, if we can just take a step back and be that soft space. So I just say, oh, that soft space, no interjection, no, because they're already going through it in their mind. Your kid's a high performer. And you're just going to deter them from coming to you and talking to you because they don't need any interjection. They're already overwhelmed. They're already at their max. And so that soft space is amazing. And let's see here, of course, 10 hours of sleep. If you can get your youth athlete to sleep 10 hours, turning off the Wi-Fi stuff, all of those pieces, of course, like you've said, encouraging healthy food and talking about how chemicals and sugar and all that cause inflammation. So they're not making as many gains. So they might as well throw away a couple of their days of training. So that's kind of how I frame that with the high sugar processed chemical kind of food. So those are
perfect. And your website, so people can look for the docuseries and take advantage of all your other services.
Right. Oh, and I guess I didn't talk about the docuseries as such. I'll quickly say the docuseries, the 6 parts. So we're going into the suicide epidemic of high performers and kind of what that's looking like and what leads to that when we're talking about bullying, all these other things, the pressure, needing the intervention right away. We talk about the history of sports and we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how that is a huge component right now with a lot of our athletes who are BIPOC, that they have experienced more generational trauma. And we kind of go into some of the science of that, and that's fascinating and where we need to come to the table with that. And then we go into more of the intervention of like these positive, amazing neuroscience-based modalities and what we can do, like we just talked, these resources that are out there, what we need to expect, what we should be developing for our coaches around understanding mental health and some of those pieces. And then hearing from the experts around sports injuries and sports concussions and all that. We have some amazing experts lined up. And then hearing from the athletes, right? So we have everywhere from professional to just young teen athletes who talk about what they want for the future and how they want culture to change. So that's what it's about. And it's www.robertsneurotraining.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Such a fascinating conversation. And thanks so much for your time. We have done over 90 minutes, but like I said, I think this is high quality information that I did not want to skim through. And my biggest takeaway from this episode is the emphasis on one, needing to smile all the time. And I would like to share with listeners here that I wrestle with an autoimmune condition myself. And on my difficult days, and I said in one episode that I did on this podcast, it was an interview that somebody did of me, and I talked about my whole condition and how I manage it every single day. My biggest thing is I just look in the mirror and smile. And the next minute, on one of my very, very bad days, still I would be able to go and do things that I would not have thought I would be able to do. So I think there's that magical effect of smiling. So I said in that episode, as crazy as it may sound, just look at yourself and smile, and that's going to just do wonders for you. So I think you emphasized on that for me, and that's my biggest takeaway. And I think the role of everyone here that we talked about, parents, athletes, support system, training staff, coaches, everything, and all the tools that you said, I think it's all just going to make it one positive journey for every athlete that listens to this conversation, and for every other member in that support system group that's going to listen to this conversation. Thank you so much, Paige, for being on the show. And I would like to also tell listeners that I'm going to have Carla on the show very soon.
Yay!
So that'll be wonderful to talk about the recovery side of it.
Yes.
And listeners, as always, follow the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review from your podcast app of choice. Follow me on Instagram at YP for all things digital media and lifestyle. Until next time, it's Vi saying so long.